Hey guys, welcome to Talking Baseball with Pars and Vinny. Really excited to do this new podcast series. We're starting up in the off season, a little late, but just the way the time, our schedules kind of worked out. But happy to get it started now. Better late than never. But really happy. I'm Vin Messana, president of Axcess Baseball, joined by Paul Parsolano, head coach at St. Anthony's, and we've done a number of podcasts together. And kind of the genesis of this idea was just how we tend to go on a tangent talking about baseball, and that's really where I came up. I said to him 2 years ago, we were doing a podcast talking about Logan O'Hoppe and Franklin Parra in Farmingdale, and I was like, this is like second nature to us, just talking back and forth. We could have one topic, it doesn't matter. So I thought we could flesh it out, and that's really what we're going to do. We're going to a little different than the typical Axcess Baseball interviews where we talk to a player and just, get the surface level stuff. This is where we're really going to be getting more in depth, talking about relevant topics with Major League Baseball, stuff with recruiting, high school baseball, amateur baseball, you name it. So, really excited. So this will be the first week. We're going to do about 5 of these, give or take one, depending on how much we get through. But special thanks to Brothers 3 for making this possible. Did you miss out having a swimming pool this past summer because of COVID-19? Don't let your family miss out again on another summer of swimming pool fun. Smart pool shoppers are purchasing their pools right now from Brothers 3, so they will be prepared for next summer, whether we are trapped at home, COVID or not. Let Brothers 3 assist you in planning your backyard now, and you and your family will be ready to enjoy next summer. Call Brothers 3 Pools at 516-735-7435 or 631-389-1818. And let's get you started on your way to family fun. All right, Par, so one of the biggest things going on right now in the offseason, which is very slow, is Trevor Bauer. He's a polarizing figure, the reigning NL Cy Young, and 1.73 ERA. You can name off all his stats, but really that's the biggest thing is his run prevention from the last year. Workhorse, pitched against the NL Central, AL Central. So, as a Met fan, you can say that maybe DeGrom faced some tougher competition, but at the end of the day, he put up a great season. But one of the things that makes him so polarizing is how he is so he's the first pitcher probably in baseball history to wear his emotions on his sleeve the way he has. So, when you are a coach, have you ever seen a pitcher show that kind of energy?
It's funny. You got Trevor Bauer. Look, you can throw Stroman in there. Stroman deserves that kind of. He's a quirky kind of guy, and he wears his emotions on his sleeve like Trevor does. But at the end of the day, there's been other pitchers that have been as demonstrative as him. But I like the idea. I like Trevor. It's such a weird. It's like a paradox. Like, you appreciate and respect that he's turning pitchers into their own branding superstar kind of mode, like a shortstop or a center fielder. Pitchers are always their shelf life is 5-6 years. You move on to the next guy. He's making it. Being a pitcher is being cool. It's cool to show emotion. It's cool to strike somebody out and duck walk your way back to the dugout. But being an old timer like myself, I'm 52. My generation was told to show no emotion. Now this generation, this guy is leading the charge of allowing kids to express their feelings when things go well. My only concern from a high school or college standpoint, pitchers are not 100% fail-proof. Like they are going to have moments where they get lit up like a Christmas tree. How do they respond to that? Are the hitters allowed to dance and do 360s around the bases as they're being walked around the bases? And how does he handle that? Does he eat it? Or does he get more demonstrative, which in turn, the mental focus, you pitched in college, of having to have that tunnel vision to throw strikes, does that remove you from the ability to put the ball over the plate and to get guys out? That's my only concern from a younger guy's perspective. From a big leaguer like him that throws 98 on the black.
Yeah. Now, when do you think that began to change? Because, like you mentioned, your age, but that's not even – it was more recently than that, It's not like it was in the 80s and the 90s. 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, that wasn't a thing. And so very recently, it must have became more acceptable where you can start to, like they say, show up your opponent after a strikeout. And he's really the one that's taking it to the next level. But I remember, Jabba Chamberlain was somebody that used to do the strut around the mound. And that used to rub people the wrong way, right?
Roger Clemens wore eye black in a playoff game. Roger Clemens was a maniac when he pitched. Turk Wendell wore what, shark teeth?
Yeah.
And brushed his teeth between innings, and he had all these men. But like I said, those are relievers. Like Clemens maybe, but even Clemens was an old school cat, and he was This guy, when he pitched,
Yeah.
Trevor between pitches is barking and pointing
Yeah.
at people and doing things.
Yeah, it really is a first. And
it
there's
is.
two things. There's what he does on the mound, and then there's what he does on the internet. And I think that any objective business person would tell you that what he's doing is brilliant on the internet, because there was never.
Is it brilliant?
I think it is, because he's preparing for life after baseball. Let's just say, his career comes and goes. He's got his own media company now, Momentum. He's doing vlogs, which is able to be monetized. He's got sponsors. He's doing interviews with players, documenting the season. And I think that with the way the internet is, that stuff lives forever. So if his career ended tomorrow and those videos go viral, he's making residual income for the rest of his life. So I would commend him for that. But I do think he goes overboard. For example, that the Twitter popularity post the other day with him putting a hat on with every single team. It's like, at some point, we do want to get some actual baseball news. So
it's like episode of The Bachelor.
Yeah.
Who's Trevor picking today? I get it. But look, there was a name. I just lost the name, but I got to think of who. There was a couple other guys that did just, I got a guy, and this is your generation, John Rocker. Mm-hmm. Remember what a nemesis he was, how he embraced it? He took the subway to a big Met Brave series.
Yeah.
He rode the subway just to stick it to Met fans.
Ripped everybody in the Sports Illustrated,
Wasn't he pitching for the Ducks like 2 seasons later?
Yep, and people still talk about him.
And his branding was, obviously they're different animals, because Trevor won a Cy Young. John Rocker was never a Cy Young caliber arm,
Yeah, so the bottom line is Trevor Bauer. He's a polarizing figure.
But here's the thing, Vin. Now, being a Met fan, and I'm a Met fan as well, I want him to pitch at Citi Field. I want to see this. I want to see that. I want to see the everything this is. And if we're in playoff contention, how much fun and excitement. Met fans, we're going to embrace the heck out of that guy.
Yeah.
There's no reason why we wouldn't.
I think more people than not will accept him. There's going to be the dinosaurs that, as soon as he gives up a home run, are going to trash him and call WFAN. And that's the nature of New York. You get that if Derek Jeter went 0-4 in a playoff game, people wanted him traded. So I don't think you can look at the extremes. I think the vast majority of people want a good pitcher, and they like the excitement that he brings. The question will be, how does he handle the media, I think? Does he throw a fit?
Never.
Or
he's not that cat.
I think he's going to have to take it down a notch if he has a string of bad starts. But, if he's going to be who he is in his career, and more recently, like the dominant pitcher, I think he's going to be just fine. That would be my overall takeaway from that.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Nice having 3 Cy Young Award winners in a row, right? The last 3 Cy Young Award winners on the same team. Sure,
I think Met fans will get over him beating out DeGrom if he's on our side at the end of the year. So another topic I wanted to talk about is some of the trends that go on in the game of baseball. And one of the things that I'm always interested in is seeing pitchers' trends specifically. And most recently, if you look at the fastball usage in the game of baseball, it actually dipped under 50% for the first time ever. It was always, you could talk about when you were a kid, because it was the same thing. It never changed for decades. It was establish your fastball, especially early in the count, early in the game, and then you use the breaking stuff, to put guys away, make them fish. And now all of a sudden, even though the fastball on average is harder than ever, guys are using it less and less. So what are your thoughts about that, and do you think that is going to have a trickle-down effect into the amateur game?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this before we logged on here. The fastball usage at the younger levels is starting to dissipate as well, because kids can spin it at an earlier age, because once mechanics are kind of locked in it with younger guys, they can spin a breaking ball and still work their way up and still grow as a pitcher. So younger coaches, obviously, if they're calling pitches, what's the one pitch a 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old boy can't hit? Can't hit spin.
Yep.
So when in doubt, guys are on base, 5th inning, spin. So I don't see that changing, because 12-year-old boys still throw 68 to 70 miles an hour at best. So they're still going to use the swing miss pitch. So I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon.
But it's a coach's job to not let them overuse it, right?
You would think, because my generation was throw fastball, builds up arm strength. The more fastballs you throw, the firmer you throw. All that mindset. But in college is the same way. When I coached in college, we threw a lot of breaking balls, because that's the one pitch hitters can get off time on. That's a missed contacts and out. So, and at the end of the day, we all play to win. The spin's going to stick around. So I can't see guys spinning it the other way and going 75% fastballs and only using breaking balls in pitchers' counts. They're going to throw the breaking ball behind the count. I remember 20 years ago, actually it's generational. There was split fingers in the 80s.
Yeah.
Then he went to the changeup with Glavin and Maddox and those guys. Everybody's throwing changeups.
And then sliders was the dominant pitch.
Sliders was the dominant pitch. And now I'm starting to see a return of the big breaking ball, the up-down breaking ball. So it's just generational. But the fastball, I agree. It's a 50% pitch now.
And the funny thing is how things are cyclical, right? So right now, the two pitches that are most dominant seem to be four-seam fastball because you want to create that illusion that it's rising. And then you complement it with a 12-6 breaking ball, which ironically is what Dwight Gooden used the dominant in the 80s, right?
North-south. No, east-west in the 90s, north-south in the 80s. Now we seem to be going back to the north-south strike zone, which I like. 4 up, spin down. You know what I mean? It changes the line of sight on a hitter.
Yeah.
And like I said, these guys are so trained. The hitters nowadays, they go for 12 months now. And it's commonplace. And for hitters, it's something they should be doing. You can hit every day now. There's so many apparatuses where you can hit in your own garage. So timing is the biggest thing because contact is these guys are going to make contact. It's just like as we go back to college. College guys go wide base with 2 strikes, just throw the hands, make contact, and see what happens. High school hitters are at that stage now where high school hitters, it's hard to strike out a good high school hitter. So the way you get them out, up, fast, down, spin, East-west doesn't really work.
But the thing that I come back to, and I haven't pitched competitively in 10 years, so probably, I don't know, maybe back then, maybe if I was playing, I would be able to adapt more. But it was harder to control or really establish the top of the strike zone because that wasn't what you were working on in bullpen sessions, right? Like you wanted to work on what you were throwing in the game, which was, 2-seam down and away, keep it, like Rick Peterson said, below the knees at the 190 zone. And then all of a sudden in a big spot, you have to throw it, control it above the letters, which, I don't know, maybe are guys working on that more?
Yeah, well, colleges used to put the string. I'm sure they still do. I think Stony Brook did it, or maybe it was Alex Brosnan at Malloy does it. They put the string at the bottom of the strike zone, and the catchers work underneath the string, and the pitcher's eyes are down at the bottom of the zone. But look, there's 9 boxes in the strike zone. A quality arm can work top, he can work middle, and he can work down. But, it depends on the pitching coach because you do have to, mechanics, velocity, there still has to come a time where you have to teach a kid to understand what the strike zone is and where he naturally throws a baseball when things are going well and not going well. So he has certain parts of the strike zone he can get to when he's down 2-0, 3-1. I walk 2 guys, oh, God, I got to throw a strike. What part of the strike zone can I throw it to 8 out of 10 times and get it in there? That's a hard part for a high school guy. College guy's a different animal, but that should be part of the routine of teaching kids how to pitch.
Yeah, and you mentioned with the guys hitting all year round too, and pitchers have the ability to do that as well, but you don't want to be throwing all year round. So I just wanted to get your take on even the idea of an off season for a pitcher. What you guys do at St. Anthony's, what you taught at St. Joseph's, St. John's before that. How much of an off season should pitchers have?
You know what? It changes daily. You get all this research one way, research the other way. At the end of the day, you do have to take some time away from the game, even not so much for the physical aspect of it, for the mental aspect of it, because it is draining throwing baseballs from January to October. That's a lot of time throwing something, So you want to step away, at least take a mental break for at least 4 weeks from the game. And depending on the kid, depending on the body, depending on your injury history, you can start back up. And there's so many cool drills that guys are using with med balls and lower half stuff where you can use that your first 6 weeks of training. Then you go into upper body stuff, and now you're back into January where you can throw your 1 pen, 2 pens a week, and you're at 8 to 10 pens before your season starts, which is awesome.
Yeah, so you basically simulated what the rigors would be of throwing without having any strain.
The process of throwing the baseball. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
A lot of cool stuff out there.
For a long time, it just seemed like there was ironclad. It was like, oh, the season's over, put down the ball for 3 months. And it didn't factor in, age or injury history. Like you said, not everybody needs 3 months off.
Nope.
Like maybe a 12-year-old that threw too many innings the year before. But if guys are in good shape and they're physically mature, like you're dealing with, or you dealt with at college, they could get back on the horse on the mound. And, and now that COVID, shortened the season, how have you guys factored in that as far as throwing? Because nobody threw 150 innings last year.
Well, we were talking about this is like. Our season, like the high school season, is going to start a month later now. It looks like it's the end of April. So I was discussing with Bobby DeMichael, and we were just figuring out, well, what kind of program? Do we push everything back a month? Or do we stay status quo and just kind of come March, they're still throwing bullpens, but they don't mean anything because your season's in April. Because if you think about it, when we're tryouts when you were in high school, March 4th.
Yep.
So now our tryouts will be 3rd week of April. But at the end of the day, you can still get out in March and throw inter-squads. You can actually have tryouts or workouts before tryouts where you can inter-squad now. So I think that might be something that's a positive to come out of this, is that the kids that are going to try out for their high school baseball team, their coaches can bring them out in March, that month of March, when we're outside grinding and get ready for our season. Now that's free time to be outside. Now you can inter-squad a little more. You can practice a little more outside. The coach can see the player a little more, get a better idea of what he is, and have a better opportunity to make a team.
Yeah.
So I think from that end, that's pretty cool. And like I said, through doing lower half stuff, the upper half stuff, just stay on the same plane. Just go with what we got.
Now, just on more of like in generalities, you went right from college to high school. What were some of the differences that you saw, right off the bat? Let's talk about in 2019 as far as preparation for a season, and then also down to the gameplay. Did you see any differences in those two age groups?
Yeah, the one thing about college guys, they know come January it's time to rock and roll because our season starts the third week of February. So you got 7 weeks to go. The biggest thing with the college guys is that they start the third week of February. High school guys don't have league games until April. So that was the first thing I noticed. I'm like, oh, goodness gracious, how do I bullpen these pitchers to prep them? Because you got to do it differently. You got to go 35 to 45 to 55 pitches and gradually build up their pens. College guys, come January 10th, these guys are ready to throw 50-pitch pens. They're ready to go. And you got them facing live in like a 4-week span, where high school guys, you kind of got to nursemaid them a little bit just because they're younger and the command isn't there and the ability to understand what their body's doing. That's the hardest thing. The one thing I did notice from college athlete to high school athlete, the high school athlete doesn't understand the game as well as the college kid does. Like in-game management, they don't have that. They don't use their intuition or instincts like college guys do. Real college players, their intuition comes into play because based on experience. So they can move around the diamond on the bases or on the mound or on defense based on their baseball experience. High school guys don't have that much. So it's harder for them. So you have to help manipulate them around the field defensively, offensively, than you would college guys. That's the biggest thing I've noticed.
But fortunately with St. Anthony's, you had guys that were playing high-level travel ball just by the nature. They're more, they're serious. They're in the Catholic League. They probably made the conscious decision they wanted to be at a school that was, competitive. So maybe a little bit different than had you gone to inherited a team that was 0-18 the year before.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Like
Having my center fielder went to Boston College. One of my starters went to Arkansas. I had real players all over the diamond. You know what I mean? And those guys, the coaches before I got there had trained them really well. So these guys were all pretty much, I just got in the front seat of the car and just drove, because those guys knew what they needed to do and they knew what the Catholic League was all about.
Yeah, and as the season went on, it showed like you guys got hot at the right time, right?
Exactly.
And went on that win streak once the playoffs started. Another thing I wanted to mention, so you went from college to high school. There's other guys, let's say the Yankee pitching coach, for example, went the other way. Do you think we're going to start to see more professional teams maybe hire college coaches just because they're relating with these younger guys? I think that's a big issue that maybe that the White Sox are going to deal with right now, because Tony La Russa hadn't managed in 10 years. He's going to a team that is primarily 25 and younger, Latino. Besides maybe the obvious cultural differences, is the age difference, maybe he doesn't know how to motivate players anymore. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but I could just see maybe you hire a guy from college. He's been around this. He knows how the modern athlete is wired.
Well, if you're thinking about a shelf life for a coach, is there a shelf life for a coach? Like if you're around a 65, well, how old is Tony?
77, yeah.
A 77-year-old man that has that kind of life experience and game experience in World Series and, the Bash Brothers, Oakland A's, the White Sox in the early 80s. Maybe it's a pyramid type setup where he's the top dog, and is his bench coach under 40? Or his base coaches, are they young dudes? Maybe they're going with the young vibe with him overseeing operations as a father figure kind of deal. I'm curious to see how his in-game management is with every guy that throws 98 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the only thing, like the speed of the game might be overwhelming, but who am I to say? The guy's a Hall of Famer. You know what I mean? I'm assuming the man can adapt.
The only thing that might work in his favor with that is because he kind of pioneered the idea of the late inning pitching changes to like that extent, where it used to be, your starting pitcher got tired, and then you went into that soft underbelly of the bullpen where you started to, you hold your breath that this guy with a 4.5 ERA was able to navigate through the middle of the lineup, where he knew what the matchups were, the splits, and he was actually using that to his benefit.
You are
So
100%. I didn't even think about it. You are 100% right, because if you think about it, Eckersley was the first one-inning only reliever, and he would only come in and tie games or leads. You know what I mean? Back before that, you would use Jesse Orozco, just to say name, in the 7th inning, and he'd go to the 9th. And whether you were up or down to keep the game close, that's your in-game reliever.
Yeah.
He's really the first guy that went to the one-inning guy. I know they used Lee Smith. I think he was with the Cubs for an inning at a time, because he would just blow out after an inning, and he wasn't the same guy. But you're right. Eckersley was doing matchups. He was doing end-game. Eckersley was the first closer as opposed to a relief pitcher, right? Because I don't think there's anybody before 89 or 88 that...
No, that was really probably the first one. And now things are coming back to that idea of a fireman, which I love. Brian Kenny had been talking about it for 4 years ago, and then the Indians were the first team to really adopt it, where you say, all right, this guy is reliable against lefty or righties. Maybe he was a starting pitcher in the minor leagues, so you're not worried about throwing maybe 40 pitches, and the Mets have kind of used that to Lugo to an extent, but he hasn't really gone, 2 innings really was his max. But the concept is, this is the guy that you trust, and he can get lefties or righties out, and he's going to come in the biggest spot, not in the 8th or the 9th inning. So what is your take on employing your best reliever in that way, where maybe it's the highest leverage spot, not just when
I think that's genius. Well, you and I have talked about this. I like the idea, when the game was changing maybe a couple of years ago, of having an opening pitcher. Like, I keep using Hansel Robles. I don't know why I keep using that reference, but I keep, because he was such a mediocre reliever. You have him get through the lineup once, and then 3rd through the 8th, you got Jacob DeGrom. DeGrom in the 7th and 8th inning is at 75 to 85 pitches. Dude, he can close it out. He's better than anything he got in the bench. He's better than anything out in the bull, and he's fresh. Now, the only thing is, how do you get through the 1st and 2nd inning? And the argument is, what makes the 1st inning not as valuable as the 5th inning?
Yeah. Well, I just heard Jared Porter, the new general manager of the Mets, was on an interview, and I think one thing that resonated me, they were talking about that idea of the last 3 outs of a game, and that always seems to be like a point of contention, because you get the old school guys that say it's different the last 3 outs, and the new school guys say it's the same 3 outs. But then if you just change the word, say it feels different, because it counts the same, but some people just might not be wired to get that pressure, because let's be real, it's 3 outs, but if you give up a home run with a guy on first in a 1-run game, now the game's over instead of just going to the next reliever.
And as an offensive player, you're in the box in the last inning, and you got 1 out left. You're not gripping the bat a little tighter. You're not approaching it a little differently. Then it's the 4th inning, and the sun's still up. It hasn't even dropped yet, and time runs on 3rd base in the 4th inning. You're a little more relaxed than you are in the 9th inning. So I'm an old school guy when it comes to that. When you start running out of outs, guys start to press. Teams start to press. When you were like, oh, God, we're 6 outs away from losing, 5 outs away. We got 4 outs left. When you got 17 outs to play with, you see things a little differently. You do things a little differently.
And that's really what the job of the modern manager is now, because let's be real. The guys in the analytics department are probably writing out the lineups or telling them about, the optimum way to build out the lineup, which that's, even above my head, the idea of like expected runs in the certain parts of the lineup. But anyway, the most important job of the manager now is getting a feel of who's available today. Did he pitch yesterday? Is he going to face lefties or righties in the end of the game? That part of the lineup. And I think that comes back to the idea of the opener, because you're not going to pinch hit for the top of the lineup in the 1st inning.
Exactly.
So whereas I think this is what people forget. They start to say, oh, the Yankees, they're overthinking things with using the opener. But I think it's a genius concept if you have the right guy. If you have 3 righties in the Angels lineup, and it's, Mike Trout, Justin Upton, and Albert Pujols, let's just say, 3 righties, and you have a mediocre righty reliever. When I say mediocre, it's all relative. The guy's a major league average reliever, and he's a righty, sinker slider. His stuff's going to be more effective against those righties, and now he gets those 3 guys out because that's his strength. Whereas if he was in the 8th or the 9th inning, and to use your example, Hansel Robles, now instead he's getting they're pinch hitting for maybe one of those weaker hitters in the 9th inning with a lefty, and Hansel Robles is pointing in the air and giving up a home run.
You got that right? No, it's out. And that's the new school, old school way of thinking. At the end of the day, as the game progresses, you want your best arm on the mound. And that was the college mindset. Your college starter at 125 pitches in the 7th inning is better than anybody I'm bringing in from the bullpen anyway. So you ride the 125 guy, and you kind of massage it and see how he's feeling. But any high-end college starter, pitch counts are meaningless. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. I'll go to 135. Murphy, you remember Murph, the kid
I was going to mention that. Yeah,
you know, he would go. He was better at 130 than he was at 70. You know what I mean? Papa was the same way. Anthony Papa was the same way. At 135, the kid's throwing better than he was at 75 pitch.
Yeah.
So, and that goes hand in hand with the pitch count. So that's something we can save for another day. But some dudes throw a lot of pitches.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. Some dudes just throw a lot of pitches.
But instead of going down the rabbit hole of pitch counts, I agree. I think you can have a whole topic on that.
Yeah, great.
How about just that specific instance where, you know, it's a 7th or 8th inning, you're starting pitchers out there. Let's be honest, they're all going to say they're fine. So what are some things you're asking your pitcher when you're looking to take his temperature? And, you know, how quick is your hook in those situations?
The first thing you notice from a pitcher who's starting to look different is their pace and tempo. If they immediately hit the brakes and now they were throwing pitches you're supposed to throw a pitch every, I don't know, 7 to 11 seconds. That's good rhythm. You're getting it back, you're nestling in, you're getting your sign, you're making a pitch. Once it gets into the 15 to 18 seconds, 19 to 22 seconds, and they're kind of walking dudes and they're just not finding the strike zone, that's your first red flag. Like, oh, good, all right, let's see how this works out. But other than that, when you go out there, you can tell if a pitcher wants to stay in or if he feels good or if he doesn't feel good just by the way he talks. And sometimes pitchers don't want you to communicate with them, so you'd have to bring in other players. Like I had a sign in college with Campanelli. I would go out to the mound and talk to the pitcher, but I would make a direction towards camp, and we'd walk up together. And he would tap me on the leg if he thought the party was over. Like, oh, dude, this stuff is awful. And he would just tap my leg, and then I know camp is like had enough. So that would mean I got to get him out of there, because if he's saying this stuff's garbage, I'm watching from the side and I'm starting to think about it. The catcher is saying, look, we might have to go to somebody else. Then I massage it and we get him out. But there's many different ways to get a pitcher in or out of a game. But the first thing is tempo and pace for me.
And like some coaches,
language.
You know, whether or not it's more of a player's coach, he might just ask him straight up, how you feeling? If he says, I got another out, you know, whereas a guy like Osick is given the hook before he gets to the mound, because in his mind it's not the pitcher's call anymore. So another specific case I always like to bring up with Met fans is the 2015 World Series. Matt Harvey's on the mound in Game 5, and I remember that feeling that I had, because you know, you're thinking about it from a pitcher's perspective. And I've been on teams where I was the ace, and in those situations in a big game, like you mentioned, you'd rather have your ace have the ball than any of your other relievers. Now, I don't know.
Familia was warm, right? He was warm. He was
so I was going to say, in that particular case, maybe the reliever was probably better than him, because Familia had 51 saves that year, and he was outstanding. But anyway, we'll keep it to, let's just say hypothetically, he was the best option. Terry Collins is going out to the mound. You know, he's basically saying, you're done. And Matt Harvey talked his way out of it.
Yeah, he did.
But the issue that I had in that situation was he gave him 2 batters. I thought it was either you take him out
or you hit the bricks.
Yeah, so he actually gave up a walk, and then he kept him in, and he gave up a double.
Yep.
And Collins, after the game, basically said, you know, I looked him in the eye, the whole 9, he trusted him. But his thinking was, well, if I'm going to leave him in, I'm going to leave him in until I'm either going to live or die with him. So I thought that was...
You know what it is? That's a January to October relationship build. You know what I mean? He trusted Matt. That was an honest conversation they had in front of 50,000 people and a million people watching. That connection those two had, whatever relationship they had, Terry bought in, and I can't beat Terry up for that call. Like, there was who was the Red Sox? Grady Little?
Grady Little, yep.
It did the same thing with Pedro, right? Yep. Pedro went out to take Pedro out, and Pedro talked him out of it, and then Pedro got shot. It was against the Yankees,
right?
It
was in the 2003 ALCS, and for a younger audience might not know, look it up. So this was before the curse was broken. The Yankees are facing elimination in Game 7, and Pedro's cruising, but he's over 100 pitches. And for him, it was a very cut and dry thing. For whatever reason, when he went over 100 pitches,
party's over.
He started to lose a little bit of effectiveness. His fastball, breaking ball's not as sharp. And the Yankees, as good of a team as they were, could not square him up. But I think that anybody from the outside could have been able to see he's not as sharp right now. Went out to the mound, left him in for like 3 more batters, and then Jorge Posada, I think it was, bloops a little single, and the Yankees take the lead. And that was a devastating loss at the time for the Red Sox, because they had
cost Grady Little his job, right? He got fired for that.
86-year drought. And then on the other end of the spectrum was this year. You know, the World Series, they have Blake Snell on the mound, the Tampa Bay Rays, at 70 pitches, and he takes him out.
Unheard of.
I couldn't believe it.
It's just gross.
Was that your thought?
Yeah, it's just gross. There's no reasonable explanation for that. And you can throw numbers at me all you want. No, man, that guy? Really? It's that guy?
Yeah.
It just didn't make any sense. And I know they committed to that way of going about making pitching changes, but it comes back to what we were talking about before, was his intuition. I know his intuition, the manager's intuition, was to leave him in, but I guess other people came into play, bench coach, first base coach, pitching coach.
You'd really have to dig deep into the numbers to find some stat that supported taking him out, in that opinion. I mean, it was very cut and dry. Like everyone uses the eye test. He was cruising. He had given up 2 hits. I think nobody had ever been removed in a situation like that, where it was that point of the game, 6th inning, and not only had giving up 2 hits. And then on top of that, he was facing the next 3 hitters that had all struck out against him twice. So unless you're just playing, I don't know, dice and it just rolled, maybe he flipped the coin. I don't know. But I don't know if there's any stat that would suggest, I guess the 3 times for the order thing, I know that's kind of been an issue.
I guess, but come on, man. He's a Cy Young winner, right?
Yep.
Cruising, 5th inning, must-win game, 70 pitches, 2 hits. It's as simple as pie. That's where the complexities of baseball, it doesn't come into play in that scenario, because the scenario is you leave him in, you sit on your hands, and you let him play defense. Yeah. That's what you do. Yeah. And if he gives up 4 or 5 straight hits or walks a dude, the wheels come off, you take him out. But I really bringing in and I know the Anderson kid. They brought in Anderson, right?
Yeah.
And he's a great reliever, and that was their formula. But you got to think outside the box. He had a really bad.
He had some stretch, I think, where he had given up a run in like 5 straight games.
Yeah.
So that to me shows that they were just completely overlooking maybe the most basic stats. They dug a little bit deeper, maybe looking at his usage of pitches and their OPS in certain parts of the game. But to me, it was very cut and dry. You have your ace on the mound, like you said, a Cy Young winner. He's cruising, low pitch count, and the guy in the bullpen that you were going to go to has been struggling. So maybe don't.
Now we were talking about this. You were saying, analytic guys, younger generation guys don't think the innings, whether it's the 8th inning, 1st inning, they all should mean the same. Okay, that game's taking place in June. Snell comes out in the 5th inning. Nobody thinks twice about it. Playoff game.
Yeah.
And you take him out, it changes the chance of winning a championship. So, games do have different weight to them. You know what I mean? And that game had more weight than a Wednesday in June.
Yeah.
If they were in that same spot and that happened and they took the loss as opposed to a playoff loss. So the point I'm getting to is that innings mean different things at different times. Games mean different things at different times. It's not all just the same formula for every baseball game.
Yeah, I think, sometimes you have to, they take the human element out of it. And I think it's fine if the front office is using analytics to determine who to keep and who to let go, because you're talking about numbers and economics, and it's decisions, and you're projecting things over in the future. But the in-game managing can't be overlooking the human aspect, because as a manager, certain guys are more comfortable in big spots.
Yes.
I think, and that goes back to the point of being clutch. I know that I like to consider myself an analytically driven fan, and I look at it through that lens a lot of times. But they kind of lose me when they say that the idea of clutch doesn't exist.
It does.
I would just change the word and say, all right, who's more comfortable in a high leverage spot? You want to call it that, because you can't ignore the fact what David Ortiz has done in big spots, what Derek Jeter did, made a living doing for 20 years. You could go back, in time. Oral Hershiser,
Gary Carter.
Yeah, guys that thrived in those big moments. I don't know what it is. Is it that from my experience, I would just say they're just able to slow down their heartbeat in those situations, probably, right? Where they're not, rubbing their hands.
I still think clutch is a real thing. I think clutch, that intangible, it's meaningful. The Mets don't win the World Series in '86 if anybody other than Gary Carter's up with 2 outs in the 9th inning. I honestly believe that, because Keith smoked the ball right before him, flew out to left center when it was kind of blowing in, but he crushed it. And those were the 2 dudes we knew one of them might have a chance if Keith could do something. Once Keith flew out, and you see Gary come up, I kind of, in the back of my head, I was like, it's over. But it was still Gary Carter, and I'm kind of leaning forward. But if it was Strawberry, Howard Johnson, Wally Backman, Lindy Dykstra, it's an out, game's over, done. Red Sox win the World Series, at least in my opinion. Yeah. So there is a clutch factor in my eyes.
Yeah, and then you look at Bob Stanley. I mean, maybe he was the other end of that, because he threw that wild pitch, and maybe I don't know, if that's in the 7th inning and it's in the middle of June, like you said, maybe he's not gripping the ball so tight in those
without
situations.
Calvin Schiraldi. But look, Mariano threw 1 pitch. He never got hit in the World Series. Never got hit in the playoffs. His numbers are unbelievable. 1 pitch guy. He's not clutch.
Yeah. He's really an extreme case, Mariano. I mean, I would love to do a deep dive into what clicked for him at some point, because I mean, you probably remember when he was in the minor leagues and he was a starter and he was a mediocre starter, and then all of a sudden the Yankees put him in the bullpen when the World Series.
I will say this: I was on a baseball trip with the Long Island Storm. It was late '90s, and we were in Boston for a tournament, and we stayed in the same hotel as the Royals that were visiting the Red Sox. So down in the bar was Greg Zahn, who was a catcher,
I remember,
and Johnny Damon, because he was still with the Royals at the time before he went to the Red Sox. And somehow we ended up getting into a conversation. We were talking about Mariano, and I remember Greg Zahn, the catcher, we were like, he throws one pitch, and this was at the height of Mariano's thing. One pitch, it's one. How do you guys not? It cuts a little bit, but it's right there.
Yep.
He said it's impossible to pick up, and when you see it out of his hands, the way it moves, it's just you can't get to it. You just can't get to it. You know it's coming, but the way it moves and the way it came out of his hands, the deception, you didn't see it until it was released, that it was impossible to get to. And the way he explained it, it just made sense.
And then he did just enough of pitching on the outside corner to keep guys honest, because I saw a million times in his career when everybody would start to sell out, and I'm sure that has something to do with Posada's pitch calling, because he probably could pick up on that too. Once guys started to cheat a little bit, just enough, open, and then he paints that outside corner, and they were just done, because whenever he would do that, it looked like the guy was 10 feet away from him. Well, really, it was just painting the outside corner.
It's just so funny how big league hitters on a one-pitch guy they can't figure it out. Just can't.
I don't even know if there's anything.
It's
I'm
insane.
trying to think right now. I mean, Bartolo Colon was probably the closest to a one-pitch pitcher recently, because I remember looking at his fastball usage. He was like 85%, 88%, and that's unheard of. I mean, and Mariano was just about 99%. Every once in a while, he'd throw a two-seamer, like I said.
I think he abandoned the slider. He didn't even really throw a slider, right?
Cologne?
No, Mariano. Towards the end, he was just cutter, fastball.
Yeah, I guess he's just cutter and four seam, just to keep guys honest every once in a while. But yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to see anything like that again. 20 years in the spotlight, never had one hiccup off the field.
Just don't get it.
Absolutely
just
incredible.
Don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good spot to end there. We got a bunch more topics, but that just shows why this is a podcast series and not one episode. So we're going to be back, if not next week, then the week after that. We're going to try to get this as frequently as we can. And thank you once again to Brothers 3 for sponsoring the series. Thank you for Pars. We didn't even get a chance to do an introduction, so we'll save that
for next week. It's fine. We'll be back again.
It'll be a good teaser. So thank you guys for tuning in to the first episode of Talking Baseball with Pars and Vinny.